Welcome to the Counselling Armchair, hosted by Counselling and Psychological Services at RMIT University. The Counselling Armchair is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land. This podcast aims to help you manage your university life so you can be at your best. We will be sharing with you tips on student life here and ways to enhance your mental well-being.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, Liz and I are chatting about what it feels like to experience anxiety in social situations. So I can imagine this is something many of us may go through at some point in our lives. Well, Liz, I know this is an area of great interest for you, and I know you run a webinar on this topic. So I feel like we're going to be soaking up all your wisdom from your material, and I hope that's okay.
Totally okay, Yvonne. Soak away.
Awesome. Yay. Fantastic. It's always great to hear that. You've got so much knowledge to impart for this.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Well, kicking us off, what is social anxiety? And maybe, a second to that question is, what would be some of the symptoms we'd be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think social anxiety is one of those conditions I don't even like using that word, difficulties that people have that can be very wide ranging. But I think the thing that's very much in common across all those situations is this sort of pervasive fear of being negatively evaluated by others. And that is what causes the anxiety. So it could range from situations that would be pretty typical that you'd expect, like having to give a speech in front of a group. And probably the majority of us have anxiety around that scenario, worrying that we're going to make a mistake, all of that sort of stuff. To sometimes things that we wouldn't even think about, like having to make a phone call, having to write in front of another person.
Wow.
Sometimes it might be having to make a decision in a social situation. But the thing that is in common, I guess, with all of these scenarios with social anxiety is this fear that you will be negatively evaluated. And so what sort of happens in terms of symptoms, as you mentioned, Yvonne, is that you walk into any social situation feeling already pretty nervous, lots of butterflies. You may find yourself blushing, going red. You may find yourself sweating. You may find yourself feeling sick in the stomach. So you can get a lot of those classic anxiety symptoms that are like the strong physiological reaction. What tends to sort of happen mentally is that you are questioning yourself, is it okay to say this? Oh God, that sounded terrible.
Right.
Oh no, what will they think of that? I sound really stupid right now. So it's lots of judgments and lots of perfectionism, lots of I should, or I shouldn't. So, those are some of the sort of psychological symptoms. And then you've got sort of some behavioral symptoms, which is really avoidance. And I think that's it sort of all boils down to avoidance. And that's the thing that I think ultimately ends up causing people the most difficulty, because avoidance is a coping strategy that is absolutely common, as you know, Yvonne, isn't it? We all do avoidance. It's such a natural thing to come to us as a coping strategy. If something's uncomfortable, I don't do it.
That's right. It's really, and it alleviates that anxiety or that uncomfortable. That's right.
Exactly. Yep. Like instant relief. So of course we want to do it. Like I do it. Oh, I haven't met a person on this earth that doesn't engage in avoidance as a way of dealing with difficult situations. But in the case of anxiety, what avoidance tends to do is to really strengthen the association between the situation that you fear and the experience of anxiety, so that you really start to believe, I can't cope in social situations. I can't do it. Or if I go in, it's going to be catastrophic. And I won't be able to cope with that. So that's where avoidance can really start to get in the way. And you might find that it's really restricting your life. You're not going out as much. You maybe not doing things you'd really ultimately like to do. You can feel like it's making a difference to the way that you'd like to live your life. It's making you a bit miserable. And that's when I would say it's a problem that you want to start to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. When it affects
Yeah,
our quality of life.
that's right.
And then we feel like, we're not really getting much out of things, and or
Yeah,
we're missing out on certain things and or
yeah,
chapters of or journeys in life when people we know around us or peers around us are getting on with things and really thoroughly having a good time, or learning
exactly.
things, right, as
Yeah.
part of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And look, there'll be some aspects of social anxiety that you think, well, I'm not going to deal with that. For example,
Mm,
I remember once speaking with someone who had a real issue with public speaking. And
mm,
I remember he said to me, do I need to deal with this? I'm going into a job in which I will never need to do public speaking. And I said, no, it's only a problem if it's a problem, right?
that's right.
We don't all have to be accomplished public speakers if it's not something
No.
that we need to do in our lives. But if, in contrast, you are a teacher and you're
Mm,
having great difficulties with public speaking, then yeah, it's something you
mm.
might like to work on.
That's right. It's not like I'm
Yeah,
going to go and learn physics if I'm not going to be an engineer. It's
exactly.
why go out of my way to make that difficult or find that challenge if it
Yeah,
isn't something to overcome necessarily, because it's not an inherent skill that I would need to have. And well, lucky
exactly.
that person who doesn't need to do public speaking.
Exactly. Exactly. I know. Yes. He just happened to choose a career where that's not, it was a career
Yeah.
that involved being outdoors and doing things. There was a great
Yeah.
skill set that was associated with it, but one of them was not public speaking. So,
Wow.
yeah. So I always say something's only a problem if it's a problem.
Fair enough.
So, you don't have to feel like you are a lesser human if you are someone that has discomfort in certain social realms because of this sort of
Mm.
pervasive fear of being negatively evaluated.
So I know you've talked about like there's the physiological symptoms. You've talked about also some of those thoughts and beliefs, and then also behavioral. I'm also particularly interested in, I guess, like looking at it from that thoughts or belief perspective. Like how
Mm.
common is it for people to develop social anxiety?
Oh, look, it's super common. Anxiety itself is pretty common. One in
Mm,
five people will
yep.
experience anxiety, which, if you think about it, is a significant portion of the population.
Yeah.
And then social anxiety itself is also very, very common. And because, of course,
Mhm.
you can get varying degrees of it, to someone who's
Mm,
maybe just more mildly impacted, to
mhm.
someone who is very, very impacted and lives a very restricted life because
Yep.
of it.
Yep.
So yeah, so it's I can't give you a percentage figure, unfortunately,
No, that's okay.
Yvonne, but yeah, like it's super common. It's an
Yeah.
issue that many people will relate to. Many people listening to this will
Yeah.
go, yeah, that's me, or I recognize myself. Just know that you're
Mm.
absolutely not alone.
Yeah,
Um,
I guess because I was thinking from that perspective of when, people experience thoughts like I'm being judged by others, or I'm also, fear someone is going to judge me for what I'm about to say. I'm going to
mhm.
make a fool of myself. But
Yes,
if they've also been quite timid or shy to begin
yes,
with, and or
yes.
passive, I wonder if those personality factors can play up those worries and or
Mhm,
thoughts or fears,
mhm.
and in turn it feels like that anxiety becomes much bigger. And
Yes.
if we haven't been exposed to, in a way, like different material or novel situations, and we've
Mhm.
lived life quite stable and quite
Yep.
the same or routined, it when we're encountering different social situations like going into a new job, I can
Mm.
imagine that can be really daunting. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering from that perspective, maybe it becomes very common because
Yes.
we all have to face novel situations.
Yes, yes. I think you're absolutely right. And I would absolutely agree that people that are, naturally a little bit more timid or perhaps even a little bit more introverted
Mm,
might be more prone to experiencing social anxiety. And I can even think of a mechanism whereby if you're quite shy as a child or quite introverted as a
mm,
child, you might already start that avoidance as a way of dealing with the
right.
discomfort of being in public or being in social situations
Yeah.
from a really early age, and you don't learn the skill set,
Hmm.
of how to deal with social situations.
Hmm.
I can remember someone once saying to me, um, we were talking about going to a conference and what you do when you go to a conference. And I said, oh, well, what I do is I just walk in and if there's an empty seat, I just walk up to that seat, and whoever's sitting next to that empty seat, I'll just say, oh, hey, is this seat taken? Hi, I'm Liz. How are you? And then I'll just engage in a bit of small talk. And I remember this person was like, really? Is that like, do people do that? Because it was just beyond this person's kind of capacity to recognize that form of social behavior, because they had avoided it all of their life. And so, that was like a new thing that they were learning as an adult, of like, this is the sort of behavior that is quite normal in this scenario. I didn't know that. So that can add to it as well, like missed opportunities for sort of learning some social skills. And then it becomes the less confident you feel because you feel like you haven't got the right skill set, the more you avoid, and the less you're able to develop the right skill set. So it becomes like that snowball rolling down the hill that just keeps sort of getting bigger and bigger.
And then it becomes much tricky to peel back those layers to try to address it one by one, or it can feel overwhelming.
Yeah, because you start to tell a story about yourself. I can't cope in social situations. It's that belief thing that you were saying before. I'm not good in social situations. I'm bad at small talk. I never can think of anything to say. I'm a really boring person. Nobody likes me. All of those sorts of things that you might say to yourself, that it's a story you tell yourself. And then that feels like it's a truth,
That's right. So we start to believe into that truth, even though we've never really challenged it.
Correct. Well, all the evidence thus far, usually because of avoidance, supports those beliefs. I'm not good in social situations. Yeah, because you've not put yourself in a social situation long enough to develop the skills that you need to get better at it. And just like riding a bicycle or any other skill that we might gain, driving a car, no one can do it the first time they try. And in fact, they might be quite clumsy and maybe fall off and skin their knee a couple of times, have a few disastrous sort of, practice sessions before they finally get it. And then it feels much more natural.
Yeah, and certainly less uncomfortable. We practice and it becomes that rehearsal. There's a cheesy saying, isn't there? Like, practice makes permanent.
I know. Oh, I like that one. I've heard practice makes perfect, but I like practice makes permanent better.
That's a new one now. Practice
like
makes
it.
permanent.
Oh,
it was
good
catchphrase.
Much better. Oh,
yeah, that's right. Yeah. And as we're speaking about skills here, like, where do you start when you're working with a client, who presents this to you?
Yeah, so look, I usually start with a little bit of education around what it is and why it's happening. And, we might do a bit of a dive into what are some of the sort of thoughts and beliefs that they might hold that are playing a role. Once we have an understanding, I always think understanding is a good place to start. Why am I this way? Then we probably move into a very practical approach to dealing with it, which does involve practice to learn skills. And so we might just isolate the skills a little bit. So I often start with nonverbal skills because that's something we're often not aware of, but it has a huge impact on how others receive you and what messages you give out unconsciously. So, for example, if you are walking into a party and you walk in with your eyes downcast, your
shoulders
arms
hunched.
crossed, shoulders hunched, avoiding eye contact, and you slink in through the door and move to the furthest back corner of the room where you sit and studiously avoid eye contact with everyone in the room, no one's going to talk to you. Because the message that you're giving loud and clear with your body language is stay the hell away from me. I'm too uncomfortable to talk to you. And so practicing those nonverbal skills is a really good place to start. So one common thing that I'll tell people to try is a really simple exercise of making eye contact with people, breaking the social bubble a little bit. So I often talk to people about the social bubble, which is this concept that we all somehow unconsciously adhere to without ever talking about it explicitly. But it's where we're out in public and say we're on a train or in a lift or something like that, and we all look, eyes front, don't make any eye contact, neutral facial expression, no smile, nothing, like, look like there's no one around you really, even though you might be pressed up against other people, right? But you don't acknowledge them. And we somehow all subscribe to this social contract without even really thinking about it too hard, probably because we observe it in adults. And then when we become adults, we start doing it ourselves.
I can imagine we also get told, don't talk to strangers. So
correct.
That's a learnt behaviour from young.
It is 100%. Yes. And look, rightly so, of course, but so I think when you start practicing this, I encourage people to actively break that social bubble and see what happens. I've tried it myself, and look, I'm not a socially anxious person, so I can recognize that it's easier for me than it would be for someone who is socially anxious. But sometimes I just try it to see what would happen. It's like a little social experiment that I like to engage in. And I'll just smile and make eye contact, and like invariably people say something to me.
Nice.
Like, hi, nice day, isn't it? Even just little inconsequential comments like that, but they connect with you. I think we're all desperately seeking connection. We just don't know how to reach out for it.
Yep.
And so that's just a very simple exercise to begin with. You don't have to have a big cheesy grin on your face. I'm talking about more of a half smile where you're lifting your cheeks, you're lifting your lips a little bit. It's not a big grin, but it's just it's that sort of facial expression of like, I'm content with the world, so just to lift your face a little bit and just see what happens. If you can extend from there to maybe saying hello to somebody and seeing what happens, then so that might be the next step that you engage in, is actually saying something and see what you get back. And every time I've suggested this to someone that I've seen clinically, they always come back and say, oh, people spoke to me. People smiled back, but it felt really nice. Oh, I didn't realize how much I used to walk looking at my toes and not just look ahead, where I was walking. So it can be quite an instructive little exercise to try. And to begin with, it's probably a least threatening one because it's not too different, having your head up instead of down, eye contact instead of avoiding eye contact. It can feel hard at first, but it's probably can feel more achievable maybe than putting yourself in a situation where you have to engage in conversation, for example.
Yeah, so that allows people to feel like as in a bit more open, and maybe other people around them will approach, or that openness just invites something. Even if you don't initiate it.
That's right. What you're saying is the door's open, come on in, and people will when they see that invitation through your body language. And then that just starts to open some more doors.
Yep.
The next thing that I say to people, because sometimes they go, I never know what to say. I don't know how to make small talk. I never know what to say, And I think it is a skill, making good small talk.
True.
It's something you have to learn, and it's something you have to practice. For some people, it comes very naturally.
That's right.
But others, it's definitely something that they work at. So, I mean, you can come up with a list of topics that you might, like to think, I might talk about what book I'm reading, or I might talk about the latest film that I saw, or one of my hobbies, or something like that. You might pre-plan some conversational topics. That's fine. But I tend to tell people, don't overcomplicate things. Try to remember 2 conversational rules. So these are my 2 rules. Okay, ready? Here are my pills of wisdom that I'm going to give you.
I'm ready.
The first one is, when you're asked a question, always elaborate on your answer. So if I say to you, how are you? And you just say, good, I've got nowhere to go.
That's fair.
Right? Yeah. The conversation stops dead.
That's right.
So
that's a conversation killer.
It is a conversation killer. And so if you sort of just add a little something to that, even though it's not asked for, how are you? I've answered the question by saying good.
Yeah.
But if I say really good, I've been quite busy today, but I managed to get outside for a walk and it was really lovely outside today. Then, the other person starts to have some conversational hooks, as I like to call them, some things to sort of hook into. Oh, you were really busy today. What were you doing?
Yeah.
And then then you can answer that, and then you start to get a bit of reciprocal or reciprocity in the conversation, a bit of back and forth.
The dialogue.
So even if you just go, I'm going to isolate that skill of elaboration, and I'm just going to notice in social settings when I'm asked questions, do I close it off with just a single word answer? And if so, once I've noticed that I tend to do that, then I'm going to try and just elaborate by just adding a piece of information afterwards and see what happens. So that's the first rule. That's the first conversational rule. The second conversational rule is be curious. So, think of yourself as a Liz or an Yvonne conducting an interview on the Counselling Armchair podcast.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah,
good
and
example.
just being really curious about the other person.
Yeah.
Generally, we find it easy to talk about ourselves, and that doesn't mean we're self-centered or narcissistic necessarily, but just, if you asked me a question about what are you watching at the moment, Liz, I'm sure I'll be able to launch enthusiastically into talking about the latest K-drama that I'm watching, because our audience might not know, but Yvonne knows that I'm really into K-dramas. So, it's something I like to talk about. So the minute you ask me one or two questions about that, I will probably give you more than you ever wanted to hear about Korean dramas, right? So use that curiosity to just ask people about themselves, and you will unlock them a little bit. So they will be able to say some things. When they say some things, then they're creating some conversational hooks. For example, with the K-drama thing, if I was meeting you for the first time and sharing that with you, you'd be like, oh, Korean dramas, I've never watched those. What are they like? Why do you watch them? Why do you like them? That sort of stuff, that you could immediately ask me some more questions that can keep the conversation going. And just it starts to have that natural flow. So rather than preparing a list of, first I'm going to talk about the weather, and then I'm going to talk about, what I'm doing at uni, and then I'm going to talk about what I want to do when I leave, and then I'm going to talk about the latest movie that's playing, and then I'm going to talk about, it just becomes a little bit unnatural if you try to pre-plan it to that extent. But if you just apply these conversational rules, you will find the conversation flows a lot better than maybe it has up until now when you've tried to make conversation in social settings.
It creates a bit of dialogue between two people if there are also that flow from, maybe a comment with a question, the other person answers, they elaborate, and then there's another question that might follow, or it might remind you of something that you want to add into.
Yeah.
And then, you're then having a conversation before you know it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Even sometimes commenting on something the person's wearing in an appropriate way. Like, we're not going to say, wow, you look really sexy today. It would be, appropriate. But it might be like, I really love that shade of blue that you're wearing. It's my favorite shade of blue. And then the person might look at themselves and go, oh yeah, actually this is my favorite jacket. I really love this jacket. I quite like this shade of blue as well. And all of a sudden, you've got a bit of conversation that's just started from something pretty innocuous. And if the other person's willing to elaborate a little bit more on their answer, look, sometimes people don't. So you might come up against the scenario where you're like, all right, ready to elaborate and I'm ready to be curious. Okay. And you say to someone, how are you? And they say, good. And it ends there, and you're like, oh no, where do I go now? And so, at that point, you might ask some more questions to see if you can get them to elaborate. And, it may get to a point where you've tried 3, 4, 5 times and you just haven't been able to draw them out, and it starts getting super uncomfortable. It's okay to say, I'm going to step away from this conversation. You don't need to kind of push yourself to the point that you're sweating bricks, feeling super uncomfortable, just find a gracious way to excuse yourself. Oh, I've just seen someone I know walk in. Could you just excuse me for a moment? And just, graciously sort of exit the conversation. It's when I give you these rules, it sort of relies on your conversation partner being willing to engage in these rules. And I think people that are good at conversation, naturally good at conversation, will just naturally do this without thinking about it. But like not everyone has those conversational skills, and you might be talking to someone as socially anxious as you, and they may not yet have kind of cottoned onto this skill set. So you sort of make 2, 3, 4 attempts to draw someone out, and then you can move on. It's okay.
Yeah, and I imagine if we're thinking about like the context of a lecture theatre, you're sitting next to someone you don't know, you've made some attempts, lecture's starting, sometimes organically, naturally, it might just stop, and it's okay.
Absolutely.
And just feel okay with that. And like you said, there is that reciprocity, and we rely on that. But if there isn't someone reciprocating with a dialogue or elaboration or a question, it's not on you entirely to actually hold the whole conversation.
Absolutely.
These are just some good starting points for people to kind of ease a bit of that discomfort when trying to start a conversation.
That's right. And look, I'll often tell people to practice in situations that are really low risk. So a common one this is a homework exercise I give to people all the time. You're gonna start talking to the checkout person at Coles or Woolies. You're gonna go up and you're gonna say, "Hi, how are you?" And they're either gonna say good and something more. Good, I'm really tired. It's been a busy day. Or they're just gonna say good, grumpy way. And so, that's okay. If it's that harder scenario, you might just say, "Oh, have you been working long?" You can pre-plan your first question. That's fine. How long's your shift been so far, or something like that. See if you can kind of get them talking. Now, I have experimented with this talking to checkout people, and I'll tell you the following. One is they're always grateful, not always, but mostly grateful to have a conversation, because it's really boring just scanning people's groceries and putting them into bags. And a little bit of conversation really brightens people's day. Don't feel like you're doing a bad thing by drawing them out and trying to engage in conversation. They'll probably be grateful for that little moment of brightness in the day.
And it just came to me as well about that. We're treating them as humans. We are acknowledging them as humans rather than just checkout bots. They're not checkout bots. They are doing their job, but they are people.
That's right. And look, the other side of it is they're a captive audience. So, they are there doing this task of checking through your groceries, and you have a few minutes in which to engage in some conversation with them that comes to a natural end, because they will tell you what the total of the bill is and you will pay and leave. So, it's you're not stuck there feeling like, oh God, how much longer is this going to last, kind of thing, So that's always a good one that I encourage people to start with first. So, so sometimes people say to me, "Oh, but I don't go through the checkout. I go through the self-serve." And I'm like, right, that's the first thing we're changing. You're going through the checkout. You're going through the checkout, and you're going to have a conversation with the checkout person. And it's low risk. You probably will never see that person again.
That's right.
And you can just engage and practice a little bit of this small talk stuff around elaborating and being curious. Every time I've tried it, I've had a really lovely conversation with the checkout person, and I leave with a smile on their face, and I hope that I leave them with a smile on their face. It's just a nice moment of connection. We all really kind of need that. We crave that.
I can imagine also, we are living in post-COVID times, but once upon a time when we were all in lockdown and during COVID, those were the only conversations we probably could have face-to-face with people.
That's so true.
Yeah, and so people would have gotten a lot out of it. The people who were working at the supermarkets, for example, or any retail workers or essential workers at the time, they would have really appreciated that human connection, especially when we had to isolate it from each other.
Absolutely. And I think that whole experience of these weird 3 years that we've just lived through is how much human connection actually matters. Even when we might have thought, oh no, I can cope fine with that, but I have a friend who's very much an introvert, and she's someone who is quite happy in her own company, and doesn't feel the need to be super social. But she struggled during lockdown. And I remember saying to her, I didn't expect that you would, because I thought, because you're someone who's, quite comfortable in your own company. That's not a criticism. There's nothing wrong with it's good to be comfortable in your own company. I thought it would just be, just like an extension of more alone time. And she said, oh, no, it was really hard because, it's like the only reason I can enjoy my company is because it's interspersed with moments of connection.
Yes,
outside of that, and I just wasn't getting that. So
that's right. Introverts also have a bit of that social battery and or social, bucket. They still need to feel fulfilled socially, maybe not all the time, but certainly, equally at most points in time.
Absolutely.
I can imagine also that homework you subscribe at the supermarket, for example, it is contained, as in, that conversation doesn't go on forever and a day.
No.
And it is contained once the transaction's finished. You get to actually finish off, say goodbye, and it ends quite nicely, even though you are just having a superficial conversation. But that is practicing that skill.
It is. So that's why it's such a great scenario. So all the checkout people out there will suddenly wonder why they're getting all these conversations from people. Stoked. But I agree. I think they are. I used to work as an usher at a theatre a million years ago when I was younger, and that's a really boring job. Like, that's just standing, apart from when you're tearing tickets and showing people to their seats, the rest of the time you're just standing around staring into space. And when it would get to interval or something, and you'd just be standing on your position just guarding a door or whatever, if anyone came and spoke to me, I was so grateful. It just made the time pass so much faster. So that might be another scenario. If you're at a theatre or something like that, go and have a chat to the usher. I loved it when people had a chat to me. I was like, please don't leave. No, stay. I keep trying to prolong the conversation just so I could keep talking.
Think people would be curious about the work as an usher. So that's another conversation starter.
Exactly.
And or, people are there watching a certain play or musical. You have that in common. Certainly another conversational piece.
Yep. Absolutely.
You've actually highlighted, I'm curious about like settings, like where can people try out these skills? Because you've mentioned about the supermarket, you mentioned about, even in the theatre, working as an usher. Are there other also places to try these skills out?
Yeah, look, I think, any situation in which you're sort of seeking a service from someone has the same sort of characteristics as the supermarket. It might be your barista at your local cafe or a waitress at your restaurant where you're eating. Any of those scenarios, even just, going into a store, let's say you're really into gaming and you go into EB Games like practice having a chat to the staff there, because they're likely to share the same interests as you, and you can ask them about, the latest product release and what they think of it. So those would be some good ideas. And then I guess the next step up for me is to really make a decision that you are willing to go and put yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit by entering into social situations that you typically avoid. And what that usually is for people is like parties, social gatherings, big group dinners, those sort of scenarios where you are around groups of people and you have to sort of chit chat to them, that when you're socially anxious, that's like, it's so uncomfortable for me, because the whole time I'm hyper aware of everything that I'm saying. I'm hyper aware of what other people might think of me and how I'm coming across, and I'm really fearful that I'm coming across badly. And so I feel like I've run a marathon by the end of that time. I don't enjoy it. And so you're not going to want to go into that situation, but that would be the next step up for me to practice, is saying yes to something, a social occasion that you would otherwise say no to, and just practicing. You can set up a little time frame around it. Like you might say, I can come but only for half an hour because I've got, you can lie. I've got something on afterwards. And then just, you can even set the timer on your watch or whatever, so it buzzes on your wrist to tell you when the half hour's up. And you might say to yourself that if you're enjoying yourself, you'll stay a little bit longer. If the half hour's been difficult, then you'll leave. But the idea is to practice tolerating the discomfort, because as opposed to avoidance, when you can tolerate the discomfort that anxiety brings, that's when anxiety starts to go away. It's paradoxical, isn't it? It just doesn't seem like that would be the case, but it is the case. So it's,
and people don't know that until they try it, isn't
they
it?
They don't. Just because I just think it doesn't sound like a logical thing in some ways. I'll put myself through discomfort and it's going to get better. I make myself more anxious and that'll ultimately make me less anxious. It doesn't sort of make sense. But I always remember there was a book that was written in I reckon it was the 70s or the 80s, and it's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I have used that phrase ever since I saw this book title. I don't think I've even read the book. I just saw the book title on someone's bookshelf.
It's catchy.
Feel the fear and do it anyway. And that is actually the key to minimizing and reducing anxiety.
Yes. Well, we know we attenuate to those feelings. So once you experience that, it might be so acute right at the beginning, but we also tend to attenuate to it or tolerate it. So at some stage, those feelings actually plateau out, stable out.
Exactly. That's
and
right.
it doesn't stay like that forever, because we know no feeling is final. No sensation is final.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always say to people, does the weather change? And they say yes. It's like, so do your feelings.
Yeah,
the same as the weather.
You're
never going to stay in a thunderstorm. It's never going to rain forever. It's never going to be sunny forever either. But, it's like, you can, the one thing that's constant is change.
Yeah, that's good. Good point. Are there any do's and don'ts with having a conversation?
Well, I would say that this might be a bit cultural actually, Yvonne. So it's probably different depending on who you're speaking to. But what I think in Australia, this is just my view. I don't know if other people agree with this or not, but I think that the potentially divisive conversations are ones about politics or ones about religion. And so I tend to just have a little personal rule for myself to stay away from those topics when I'm first meeting someone, because, if you have a very oppositional view to them, then it can become a really heated or uncomfortable or unpleasant conversation.
It becomes a debate rather than a conversation.
A debate, exactly. So I would sort of steer away from those, provocative sort of topics. So those are my sort of two rules. But then I think also just being careful not to be too personal to begin with. So you want to hold it at a level of curiosity, certainly, but not so much curiosity that you're asking about things that only someone's really intimate friend might know.
Yeah.
Like you probably wouldn't be asking about I don't know, like
even a dating profile, for example. At the
that's
beginning,
right.
Yeah,
you
wouldn't go into something too personal about that.
Correct. Yes. So think of it as like, in a way, like a dating profile, that you would just sort of keep it a bit neutral. Like you wouldn't tell everything about you, wouldn't ask everything about them. Like you wouldn't meet someone within the first 5 minutes and say, so what are your deep and dark secrets? What's wrong with you? What are your psychological difficulties? Oh, hang on, we've just met each other. So keep it sort of at a more sort of neutral, not so deeply personal. Things that I think are totally okay to ask, just in my view, are what someone does for a job, maybe what their interests are, what they've done recently, where they've worked, where they go to uni, what course they're studying. Those sorts of questions I think are a good place to start. And then by their answers, you'll see whether it's okay to go a little bit deeper. Having said that, there are certainly some people that might find those questions too intrusive. So I know it can feel like a bit of a minefield. You do have to feel your way a little bit. But, I think if you just roughly have this idea of keeping it a bit more neutral until someone gives you a little bit more, I think I'm just laughing to think about the faux pas that people sometimes make in social situations. And one of them is to never ask a lady if she's pregnant. Right. That's one of my key tips, because
Or her age, is that
she
right?
may look, or her age. She may look pregnant, but she might not be pregnant. And when you feel like you look pregnant, but you're not actually pregnant, there's nothing more demoralizing than someone saying to you, "Are you pregnant?" So that one I'd steer away from. Yeah, that's it. So certain things like that comment on someone's personal appearance is something they might feel sensitive about, like their size or, so it's those sorts of things maybe,
Or
comment on their taste.
Physical appearance.
I'd probably
some people can be sensitive about
bit
that.
sensitive about that. That's it. The other one is, and I think this is an interesting one for Australia, where we're such a multicultural country, is asking someone where they're from. Can be a really tricky question as well.
It is. Absolutely.
Because, many of us may have lived here for generations, but we look like our ethnic group, but we actually have lived in Australia all our lives. So I'm in that category. And so if someone were to say to me, "Where are you from originally?" My answer would be Australia, because I was born here. This is the only place I've ever known. This is my home. This is my country. But yes, I have a different ethnicity. And so people can be a little bit particular about that sort of stuff and how that's framed. So I tend to sort of steer away from that a little bit. Sometimes I might go at it, if I'm curious about it, I might go at it from the perspective of, your surname sounds a bit European, or your surname sounds a bit Asian. Is it an Asian surname? Is it a European surname? Is it a Swedish surname? I don't know, like whatever. And then if the person elaborates and says a little bit more, yes, it's, my surname's Croatian, this, which is the true. I'm happy to share that, audience. I don't mind sharing that. And then I might say a little bit more about that. Then I'm sort of giving the other person the signal that it's okay to ask me more questions about that. I'm quite happy to talk about that. But if they kind of put walls up a little bit of like, or they give you a very closed answer, yes, no, it's like, well, maybe just don't keep pushing that one. Don't go there.
That's right. And the same rules kind of apply when we're trying to work out if the other person wants to hold a conversation.
That's right.
If they give you some closed answers, probably not a good idea to keep going with that kind of conversation.
Exactly.
And if they're not asking you questions back, maybe they're not holding the interest, and that's okay. As you said, try to persist. But if you keep getting that really limited feedback, there's no point pursuing that.
That's right.
I just also want to add, I think the other part, the other way I get around the cultural question is, what is your cultural heritage?
Yeah,
so
that's
a different way of putting that. But I like the surname one because maybe it helps people to also think a bit about their own family origin or their ancestry. And some people really like to trace the family tree. They like to expand on that. It's a good personal story, but it doesn't get too personal.
Absolutely. I would say, I think most people would be quite comfortable answering that question, and I think that as Australians, we're we're fascinated with the world, I would say. That's an Australian characteristic. We love to travel as a general rule, and we're really interested in other cultures, and we're very lucky to live in a place where we get exposed to so many other cultures. We almost don't need to leave Australia to experience other cultures, which is very lucky. It's very one of the things I'm very grateful for living here. But as a result, I think we're just attuned to cultures and we're interested, so it can be a great topic of conversation.
Absolutely.
But frame it in a way that's careful. Like you said, I really like that. What was that? Say it again, Yvonne. It was what's your cultural
heritage.
Heritage is a beautiful word.
I like the surname. I think it explores, helps people elaborate and explore the family tree a bit as well.
That's right. Yep.
And I guess I'm wondering, we've talked about the skills that people can try out, but we've also talked about, initially maybe some beliefs that people might have. And so are there some common self-beliefs or core beliefs that people tend to hold, the ones who are socially anxious?
Absolutely there are. I think there are some pretty common traps that you can fall into with your thinking when you're socially anxious. And so, some of them are things like maybe overestimating the likelihood of something being true. So like, for example, I'm going to bomb. I'm going to bomb in this sort of social setting. I'm not good at it. I have nothing to say. I'm never going to make friends. I'm never going to find a partner. People frequently misinterpret. So, let's say we had the scenario where you met someone, you've just started a new job, and you met someone the day before, and the next day at work, they're walking down the hallway towards you, and you smile and wave, and they say nothing. They look straight ahead and say nothing. Someone who's socially anxious will immediately go, it's me. It's about me. It's something about me. They don't like me. I came on too strong yesterday. I didn't talk intelligently enough. So you sort of make that assumption that it's something negative. We do have a negative bias. All humans have a negative bias. So we tend to assume it's something bad about me, when in reality what it might have been is that person normally wears glasses and they didn't have their glasses on and they couldn't see you properly. Yeah. Or they were really preoccupied with what they were thinking about and they didn't notice you there, but they actually do really like you, but they just, were caught
didn't
up.
see you.
Yeah. They might be on the phone but have one of those, have their earbuds in, their Bluetooth on, that's not as obvious that they're on the phone.
Yes.
So those are some common things. Maybe sort of taking a lot of personal responsibility for when things go wrong. That's another sort of cognitive distortion. The other two that I think are really key with anxiety is having a very strong perfectionist. So I think you can always recognize what your perfectionist is saying to you when you start paying attention to how often you say should or should not, or must not, or I have to. Because those should statements are usually the voice of your perfectionist, and usually your perfectionist is telling you that you should be amazing and perfect and never get anything wrong and bright and shiny, and only then will you succeed in life, and no one can live up to that. So that's another thing to pay attention to. How much shoulding am I doing? And then the other one that I think is plays a really big role is our inner critic, which is that critical voice. Again, we all have that critical voice that tells us everything that's wrong with us. We are so mean to ourselves in a way we would never be to anybody else.
Yes, we are hard on ourselves.
We are. And that's our inner critic talking. So that's another sort of issue that people with anxiety commonly experience, is a really harsh inner critic. What are some other things? Maybe some all or nothing thinking. It's black or it's white. It's not grey. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to be amazing. Maybe always focusing on the potential catastrophic outcome, so
worst case scenario
thinking. Correct. That's right. Yeah. So that's another sort of cognitive distortion. So you walk in already going, this is what's going to happen. It's a terrible thing. And then, weirdly, sometimes self-fulfilling prophecy kicks in and you set about the chains in motion of actually bringing that catastrophe about. You might also have a bit of selective attention.
Absolutely.
So that's another example of something that people can do where, they notice, it stands out to them so clearly, all the, when someone frowns or when someone gives them a side eye, or, doesn't smile wide enough or doesn't stand close enough to them or whatever, like, you notice that stuff, but you don't notice the moments that someone was really warm to you, or you had a really nice moment or a nice bit of eye contact and a shared smile or shared amusement at a joke or something like that. Again, because of that negative bias, we can tend to filter out all the good stuff that happens and really tune into the stuff that's not good, so that when we reflect over an evening and how the evening went, what's sticking out in our mind is all those faux pas that we believe we made, all those things that we did wrong. So, challenging yourself a little bit to say, hang on, were there any good moments? Did anything go right? Is there anything I'm proud of in how I handled myself in that situation? is an important way to start to flip the thinking a little bit.
And fairness to our brain. I know that our brain tends to focus on that negativity, let's say as part of survival.
Yes.
And so we have that selective attention or attentional bias to try to filter through, these are things I could do better next time.
That's right.
But in fact, we're probably doing really well.
Exactly.
No one's perfect, and yet we hold ourselves to such high standards, like you said, with the perfectionism, that we should be actually socially perfect throughout every social occasion,
like
which is unrealistic.
Poised and elegant.
That's right.
Intelligent sounding and,
that sounds very unapproachable, actually.
Right, doesn't it? Oh, my goodness. You wouldn't want to talk to someone like that because they'd be like, oh, that makes me be uncomfortable. Absolutely.
It's not really inviting.
No, that's right. That's right.
Well, one of the core beliefs you've touched on was about the inner critic, which I know can contribute to low self-esteem.
Yeah.
Actually, does it, or do you notice that it reinforces the social anxiety?
100%. I think low self-esteem and social anxiety are definitely go hand in hand. It'd be pretty rare to find someone who's socially anxious who doesn't have low self-esteem. Because whilst you're fearing so much about being negatively evaluated by others, you are telling yourself there's a very real risk that you are going to be negatively evaluated by others because you are not good enough. You're not, there are all these things wrong with you. You are boring. You are, unpleasant, whatever awful things you're saying to yourself. So yes, 100% low self-esteem is a very clear sort of correlate with social anxiety. And sometimes working on the self-esteem might be what you need to do. There's the practice side of things, but you can practice as much as you like, and it may not shift for you until you start to tell yourself a different story about who you are.
So should we be learning to love ourselves? Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. I mean, Whitney Houston said it, didn't she? Greatest love of all. No, look, it's so true. I think if you can get to the point that you can say to yourself, if I wasn't me, I'd be friends with me, then your self-esteem is in a much healthier place. What that means is you can identify that you've got some positive attributes to contribute to any relationship or social engagement that you contribute to, that you participate in rather, and you can recognize that you have value. You have value to others, and to start to do that. I make it sound easy. Oh, just find out what's good about you. I know it's not. I know that this is something that people can struggle with for years, is being able to see the good in themselves. But, I think it's an attentional thing to, like what you said before about our selective attention on certain things.
True.
We have a selective attention on noticing when we stuff up or things we don't like about ourselves. And we don't look for the good things. And there's a quote that I really like by a musical theatre writer called Stephen Sondheim, which is, you see what you look for. And I think that is so true. Some simple words that just really hit the nail on the head, right? You see what you look for.
Yeah.
So, pardon me, I'm going to cough. Dear, edit that one out. Yeah, you see what you look for. And so, if you are looking for signs of what's good about you, I promise you'll find them. You have to be prepared to look for them and not worry that you're being arrogant or that you'll somehow become a raving narcissist if you start to, just in the privacy of your own head, to start to say, I did that well, or I like how I said that. And, so, if you can sort of do that kind of thing, then you can start to build a better picture of yourself.
Yeah. And I guess it can be done through things like even journaling.
Yes,
maybe
absolutely.
that
Absolutely.
I think we talked about another time about gratitude journal, as you called it.
Absolutely. Yes, gratitude journaling. Sometimes I tweak the gratitude journaling to be a one good thing a day diary.
Yeah.
And so that might be just at the end of each day to just reflect on what's one thing I did well today, what's one thing I'm proud of myself for, what's something that I liked. And it can be super simple, like I got the shopping done when I said I was going to. It doesn't have to be, it could be, or I practiced making eye contact today, but just to actively look for examples of where things are.
It's good to keep it simple, because those are the basics, and then we can build from there as well. And they do stack up. They very much do.
They do. And if you write them down, you can look back over them as well. So then you start to build up a body of evidence of things that are good about you. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And is it important to be, I guess, self-compassionate when we try out these skills, because we know that, we've heard it now and we really want to go and practice it, but there may be that perfectionism in us that want to do it well or do it right.
Absolutely. Yes. I think self-compassion is extremely important in this practice. And when you're starting to try and work on this, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to get it right straight away. You're not going to be comfortable straight away. You need to be really gentle with yourself. Be your own best friend. Talk to yourself in a way that you would talk to someone you really deeply care for. We would never say to our best friend who is struggling, yeah, you loser. Why did you do that? True. You stuffed up. You should know better. Like, oh, we would never do that. Just stop and think, what would I say if my friend came to me and said, that didn't go very well. We'd probably say it wasn't as bad as you thought. Yep. We'd probably say something encouraging. What about this thing that you did? That was really good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Being kind and being patient as well.
Yes. Absolutely. Being patient and give yourself time to develop the skills. Like anything new, as we said earlier, riding a bicycle, driving a car, learning a language, it takes time and practice to get better.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to say in closing, because I think that's a nice spot to finish, that, social anxiety is a really common problem. Believe me, you are not alone. And there are things that you can do to improve the difficulties you might be having. So I hope that our listeners have been able to get some ideas today on things that they can do and practice. But above all, as we just said, be kind to yourself, set reasonable expectations, and know that you can't nor should you be perfect. And so until next time, take very good care of yourselves.
Thanks, Liz, and bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us today on the Counselling Armchair. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned a useful thing or two. Have a great week, and just remember that life can be amazing. See you next time.
Isn't life so amazing? Sometimes it can get crazy, but hey, that's okay. We've got another day to make mistakes and say sorry. There's no sense in our worry, 'cause all we can do is try our best to make it through with love.